Okay. Okay.
I got you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to get underway. And if you're sitting at the back, unless you're shy or have a communicable disease, you might want to consider moving down front so that when we're taking questions, you get called on and you don't have to walk so far to get a microphone. And also so you can, just hang out with everybody. I'm D.D. Guttenplan. I'm the editor of The Nation. And it is a great pleasure to be here with you at the New School. Thank you to the New School for hosting this. And I'm going to introduce our panel, starting from, as it were, the far left, which is a place we're always comfortable at The Nation, but perhaps Professor Christina Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham, is less comfortable there, but she's also sitting on my right, which is where we usually find ourselves. In addition to being somebody you've probably heard on the radio, seen on television, and hopefully read in The Nation and elsewhere, she has a book coming out called How to Build a Democracy, from Fannie Lou Hamer and Barbara Jordan to Stacey Abrams. So talk about meeting the moment. We are going to need How to Build a Democracy. Next to her, on her right, Katrina vanden Heuvel, the editorial director and publisher of The Nation, who, as they say, needs no introduction, but, has been doing this for quite a while. And it's great to have her with us. Next, Elie Mystal, whom you've also probably seen on television, heard on the radio, and read in The Nation regularly. In addition to being our justice correspondent, Elie has a book coming out soon called Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws Ruining the Country. So you might want to make a note to pre-order that from wherever you pre-order your books. Hopefully an independent bookstore, hopefully one that carries The Nation, but in any case, make sure to get
Wherever they still allow black authors to be sold.
For a little while. And last but by no means least, Bhaskar Sunkara on my left, as he always is, president of The Nation, founder of Jacobin, and someone who I'm sure you've all also seen or heard lots. So I'm going to sit back down. We're going to keep this fairly informal. And we're going to try and move the conversation from fear to something that isn't fear, maybe hope. We're going to go through the valley of anxiety, but we're going to begin by asking everybody, starting with Christine.
Christina.
Christina, thank you. No, that's good. And moving that way, what is it that you're most afraid of, most worried about in regard to the election? I don't mean like spiders, right now.
What am I most afraid of? I mean, honestly, I don't know if I'm just like the drunk lady in the Titanic, but I'm actually not scared because I'm working. I'm writing, I'm talking to people, I'm teaching. That always gives me hope. Obviously, I'm getting lots of frantic texts every morning, like, what's going to happen? And I remind them I'm a political scientist, not a political psychic. But I think if I do allow myself to be scared, it's honestly about physical violence. So we know that Donald Trump is coming to New York tomorrow to have essentially a 1939 Nazi rally. I do worry that he is going to not accept any results if they aren't in his favor, and I think that January 6th was a practice run. So I do worry about people in particular states that need protections. So yeah, that's probably my big ticket item is the physical violence across the country that I think could be incited by a major party candidate.
Particularly if that major party candidate has lost the election. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I have to confess I also worry about that. Katrina?
I am most afraid of Trump winning and Project 2025 being institutionalized. I think Trump in his first go-round was indolent, toxic.
Three Stooges fascism.
Yeah, but I think that been a learning curve, maybe I'm crazy, but that if he outsources it to the team which put together Project 2025, and I'm not just talking about the Heritage Foundation, if you look, there are about 100 organizations which are part of that. As Kim Phillips-Fein, I believe, wrote in our issue, this is a much more dangerous Heritage Foundation document than Mandate for Leadership, which Reagan got handed to him and which he did quite a bit with. So just the ravages of, the breakdown of so much in this country, that even though we're a resilient country, I think it will take decades to patch back together. Elie writes about the courts in the issue we did. That's just one area. The deportation of 1 million people, it's hard to fathom, but it happened in this country in the late 30s, early 40s. Mexicans deported from California to Mexico. So I'm just saying, I think the institutionalization by a more competent neo-fascist operation is very dangerous.
Elie?
Well, I'm the opposite of Christina. I'm afraid of everything. I am open nerve. I can barely sleep. I can barely work. It's hard for me to focus on things. I am terrified of just about everything. The thing I am most afraid of, I guess, goes to my beat at The Nation. I suppose even if there is a situation in which Harris wins the election, she wins it clearly, she wins the Electoral College, 270 votes at the Electoral College is not what it takes to become president anymore in this country. 5 votes on the Supreme Court is what it takes to become president anymore in this country. And we have just seen from the Supreme Court a willingness to make ridiculous, unprecedented, lawless decisions in favor of their one true Lord and Savior, Donald Trump. We saw that with the immunity decision just last term. So my trust in the Supreme Court to uphold the results of an election that Trump clearly loses is near zero. And that doesn't even, and that only looks at the Supreme Court. I think I was talking to Don this morning, the thing that has me worried this morning is when you kind of look at some of the polling numbers and you play with your little, map and move that state here and this state there. If you have an election scenario where it comes down to, say, North Carolina, which is one of the possible scenarios. If she loses Michigan, she'll have to pick up North Carolina. North Carolina's state Supreme Court is controlled by rabid Republicans who have already ruled to inject chaos into the election by removing Robert Kennedy Jr.'s name from the ballot after those ballots had already been printed. The North Carolina Supreme Court is crazy. And if some of you in this room are old enough to remember, when state Supreme Courts are crazy, that's how you end up in Bush v. Gore type situations, right? That's how you end up with the Supreme Court getting the opportunity to parachute into a state and change the winner of an election from blue to red if they so choose. So I guess the overarching fear is that even if we win, we might not win.
Yeah, like Elie, I'm prone to worrying. I had a dream a couple nights ago in which inexplicably the Dodgers swept the Yankees and Trump won the election in the same day. It both happened on November 5th, which thankfully isn't possible. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, even Game 7 wouldn't stretch that far. But yeah, it really rattled me. It rattled me, that dream. I have a little bit more faith, I think, than my fellow panelists in the institutions of American republicanism at the federal level, not in the Supreme Court, and certainly not in the individual states, but I do think that if Harris does manage to get enough electoral votes, I do think the election would be certified, and I do think any violence or kind of, to use this kind of old language, kind of extra parliamentary sort of violence on behalf of Trump supporters would be, suppressed by local police and so on. I just have that it's not that I don't think we're sliding in the direction where our Republican institutions wouldn't be endangered or aren't moving the wrong direction. But I do have some faith in that result. Obviously, at the margins, we could easily imagine a Florida-like situation. We could easily imagine the states themselves making it more difficult for Harris to win. But I do have that faith. My main concern is if Trump wins, the long-term effects of his economic policies. Mm-hmm. So Harris's economic policies, to the extent they follow the Biden economic formula, I think are generally right. I think that the mix of things that Biden did was basically right. He just needed to be a little bit more aggressive in pursuing national industrial policy, bringing back manufacturing jobs, other things he was doing, but I think he pursued the right path. But he required a very brief window of congressional support to be able to do that. Now, Trump's economic agenda can largely be enacted, or much of it can be enacted just through executive orders. There's a lot that he could do with his tariff policy without having a supermajority in the Senate. And I worry that the economic consequences of Trump's plans will be severe, and this will create an environment of scarcity. In an environment of scarcity and not growth with some problems, like the current U.S. economy, it'll be much easier to scapegoat immigrants and to build more support for his reactionary agenda. So I think once you're in decline as a country, that's when the right truly gains power. And you could see some of the anti-immigrant sentiment growing and some of the riots, far-right riots in the UK. And you see this as maybe a possible future for a declining U.S. in the future.
So I'm going to answer my own question also, my prerogative as moderator. So I'm afraid of I'm afraid of a lot of things, maybe not as many as Elie, but a lot of things. And it sometimes is hard to, stare at the screen in the morning or turn on the computer and look these days. And one thing I'm afraid of is that the young people I know who say it makes no difference who wins this election are going to find out and have to live with the consequences of acting on that, and I really hope that's not the case. But it is a thing I've heard quite a bit in the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. More, thankfully, in non-swing states than in swing states, but still. Mm-hmm. And then the big thing I'm afraid of, because I agree with Bhaskar that if Kamala Harris wins enough electoral votes by a reasonably clear margin, I think the system will work sufficiently to confirm her in office. And people ask me a lot whether I'm afraid of, another January 6th. And I say, no, not really, because this time this commander-in-chief is a Democrat. And, and it's not Merrick Garland, so it's not the most feckless Democrat. I see Elie thinking, yeah, but Merrick Garland. So I don't think they're going to put up with a lot of bullshit if there's a clear mandate. What I'm much more scared of, and I am actually quite afraid of this, is that the election goes the other way. And it's not 1 million people, Katrina, it's 20 million people he's promised to deport. And if they're deporting 20 million people, I guess what I worry about two things. I worry, of course, about the impact on those communities, but I also worry about Americans, my countrymen and yours, being turned into good Germans. Because that's what it would take to deport 20 million people. It would take collaboration on a massive scale. And, that terrifies me. Although it does also give me some hope, because it means that there'll be a need for massive resistance. So, in terms of preparing for the worst, and I wanted to get the worst out there so we can move on. But anyway, that's what scares me. I'm going to start at the other end this time, and I want to know what it is that you're hearing and, what it is that you pay attention to these days and what it is that you've heard recently that makes you think one thing or another about the election. I'm leaving it open-ended on purpose because we all have very different media habits and we all have very different social milieu that we pay attention to. So, Bhaskar?
Yeah. I think the impact of money in politics has been a little bit overrated, particularly on the left. We see often in relatively low turnout local races, for instance, it's often the activist-supported candidate that has more money, more volunteers, and so on. We saw in Ohio, for instance, we often talk, I think, a little more propagandistically about J.D. Vance's support from Peter Thiel in Silicon Valley, but he actually was massively outspent in that race. So I guess I hope that money in politics actually does make a difference, because Harris's money advantage, especially if it's strategically deployed in the right states, and especially with the Democrats' advantage in the kind of get out the vote, might actually be an interesting inverse to 2016 when people accused the Clinton campaign, I don't know enough to say whether fairly or not, of deploying resources really ineffectively and not kind of targeting the right states, not campaigning in Michigan and so on. So what's been kind of the speculation of people that I talk to who are much more engaged in the day-to-day of Democratic Party election politics is the scenario in which the Democrats actually have an electoral college advantage, and either the popular vote is a dead heat or the popular vote is lost, and Trump's support being deeper in red states, but perhaps the Republicans not being as organized in key swing states. Of course, that would lend even more to the crisis of legitimacy, that it might make a transfer of power that much more difficult. But I guess as someone who's been very much in the mindset of thinking of the electoral map in, let's say, 2016, when Clinton had such a large popular vote advantage, it's interesting to think that it's becoming more neutral, which it is, or that in the next 16, 20 years, we might get to the point where Democrats regularly have an advantage in the electoral vote. Obviously, this is most consequential institutionally in that it might help create more impetus for a national popular vote compact or something like that.
So I went to Harvard, so I have a lot of relatively well-off white boyfriends that I'm still in contact with. And one of the things that I end up spending a lot of time listening to is how fucking confident they are that Trump is going to win. Even the ones who are going to vote for Harris are really sure that Trump is going to win. And that makes me feel a little bit better, because if there's one thing that helps my side, it's overconfident rich white boys, right? So that always makes me feel better. What I look for a lot, though, when I'm sifting through all the news sources and all the people that I talk to, I've gotten particularly focused on the Latino vote, and specifically the Latino men vote. We kind of know that Trump is going to win upwards of 60% of white people, right? Upwards of 60% of white men, somewhere around 50% of white women, and I know that maybe this time he'll only get 48%, and but like somewhere around half of white women are going to vote for the adjudicated rapists, and there's nothing you can do about that. But like in that, there's a group of Latino men who I think are still gettable, or are still, if not undecided, or I don't know how they've decided, right? Harris faces historic levels of terrible coverage and sexism in her campaign, at least historic since the last lady ran, who also faced historic levels of sexism in her campaign. Like, you know, it's not an accident this country is the only advanced democracy that has not put a woman in power. Like, that's not a quinky dink. This is a very misogynist country, and I guess I'm trying to gauge just how misogynist it's going to be this time by looking at the Latino male vote, while I have in my other ear all these overconfident white bros telling me that she's going to totally lose. So like that's kind of like on a kind of day-to-day, like when I'm doom scrolling Twitter, where do I stop and like actually like click through to the article? Those are the kinds of articles where I click through.
No wonder you're worried.
Right. Stay up on Twitter.
So I'm old-fashioned. I don't know if I understood Bhaskar correctly, but the money in politics, I think, is about as obscene as the defense budget we still live with. I don't think Democrats can continue to play the arms race. I may be wrong, if they're going to remain a party which we have ties with. And it's not just, I mean, we've always talked about, quote, ordinary people having a chance. And I think you get Thiel involved or Musk, you know, you're given over a lot. It's not just the fact that it's a $500 million Senate race in Ohio, which Sherrod Brown is competing for. I spent a lot of time thinking about the Iraq War as editor of The Nation, so I'm not ecstatic about seeing Liz and Dick back. I think there's a way to run a presidential where you're mobilizing your base and not going for the elite establishment, including 10 retired admirals, generals, CEOs. And to go after Trump as unfit, he's more than unfit, but it's not speaking to people who seek change. I mean, people know, I think they know by now. If you're anti-Trump, you're anti-Trump. So do you mobilize your base and try to grow that, or do you decide you're going to do the kind of establishment route? Democracy, democracy. We're not anti-democratic, but there are other ways of parsing democracy, like economic democracy. So that's what kind of, you know, it just doesn't seem like the right way to bring on Liz Cheney and spend 3 days with her as opposed to going to the UAW and spending time with Sean O'Fane. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I'm not going to go there because I want to talk about this thing. So, so to Elie's point, though, you know, I think a lot about misogyny, and I always remind people you don't have to be a man to uphold patriarchy. Mm-hmm. So there are going to be a lot of women who won't be able to pull a lever for a woman at the top of the ticket either. The same way you don't have to be white to be a white supremacist, as we have seen Latino men and Asian men as the fastest growing groups of the Proud Boys and certain black men. Because I study black politics, my issue is the scapegoating of black men. So if Kamala Harris doesn't get across the finish line, it's because black men didn't vote for her. And so if we look at the data, Barack Obama, the data has told us this. Since 1952, since we started collecting the data, white women have voted for the Republican Party candidate in the majority every single time, except for 2 times, 1964, LBJ, and 1996, second term Bill Clinton. They did not vote in the majority for Barack Obama either time. They did not vote in the majority for Hillary Clinton or for Joe Biden. So to your point, the percentages, white women vote with white men. They are the Republicans. So even if black men defect just a touch to say going from 90% to 80%, that's still 8 out of 10 black men who are voting for the Democratic Party. There are some real questions, to Katrina's point, about the future of the Democratic Party and some real disappointments that black voters have with the party. That's not necessarily, I'll wait to see the exit poll data, that's not necessarily saying that black men are defecting from Kamala Harris. So a lot of these conversations with black men, it's black men who were citizens, but the follow-up question is, did you vote and do you plan on voting? And usually they're asking people who haven't voted. So no offense, I don't really care what you think, not until after November 5th. I want to know what black voters think right now. So when you have Barack Obama finger-wagging, Bill Cosby-esque pound cake speeching to black people, he knows the data more than anyone. And it's not black people who are going to be the problem. It's white voters. So the
So why does he do
scapegoating-
it? I always wonder why he does it.
Because it's effective. Half of black America does like this father figure to say, this is what we need to be doing, pull your pants up, be better fathers. Let's be clear, a lot of Barack Obama's issues are Barack Obama's issues, right? So when he's saying like, be better dads, it's like, that's your issue. So work on that. Don't go to Morehouse and tell guys to be like, you know, don't be leaving these babies. It's like, you're at Morehouse. 500 people are graduating. Like, this isn't the crowd. So that's a Barack Obama therapy issue that, you know, to be president, you have to have daddy issues. Look at all the presidents. And so there we are.
Is that true for
It is
female
true.
presidents?
I don't know. Well Kamala
we'll find
Harris,
out.
she doesn't talk to her dad. I don't know. I have no idea. We will find out. But like, if you go through to modern history, all of them have daddy issues. So
But just to back up the point, like there are a lot of black people who want to be told that the reason why we struggle is because not enough black people do the right thing.
Exactly. I
Like,
wrote a
that
whole
is-
book about it.
that
It's
is
called
a-
Black Ethics.
That is a comforting narrative to a certain group of
And
people.
it's a historic narrative. We have seen this narrative time and time. It's not a new narrative.
No, but I'm sorry for responding in a parochial fashion, but I'm a parochial person. And it reminds me of the joke about the guy in Germany, Jewish guy in Germany, who says, "Why do you read Der Stürmer?" And he said, "Well, because I read the ordinary papers and we're powerless and we're beset and we're constantly being persecuted. I read Der Stürmer and we control everything."
Well, that's why, the joke about, like, I watch Fox News because according to Fox News, Hillary Clinton's still president, right? So
Yeah. it's like
I
that.
think my issue is, instead of focusing on why it is that some people might be defecting from the Democratic Party, to Katrina's point, why is it that people, aren't necessarily excited about a candidate even though there was a short runway? Instead of asking those questions, I get really frustrated with the scapegoating of, in this particular election, it's going to be black men who are the problem if she doesn't get across the finish line.
Well, no, I think, first of all, I think you're absolutely right. I think also we should probably, we, the nation, so memo to self, we should do something on the white voter problem. Elie's written about it, others of us have written about it, but that phrase doesn't get used enough. So yes, it's a phrase we should put into the lexicon. Absolutely. I want to pick up on something that Katrina said, and also maybe a little cause for hope, too. So the thing that Katrina said is about the contrast between the kind of campaign that this seems to be on the national level, and that's certainly in terms of the air war. In other words, what you're seeing on television is a bid for Republican women in suburban counties. That it's like laser-like focused on that. So we don't say anything that might scare them. We don't talk about taxes. We don't talk about redistribution. We don't talk about racism. We don't talk about anything structural. We talk about Donald Trump is bad, and we are not Donald Trump, and that's why we're all able to sing Kumbaya together with the Cheneys. And I'm thinking, well, there was once a campaign that tried to run on economic issues and appeal to what we always thought of as the base of the Democratic Party. And, Bernie Sanders ran twice that campaign, and he didn't win either time. But I have to say it was fun while it lasted. And, maybe some Democrat will run that way again. But that's clearly not the choice the people who are running the Harris campaign have made. They have made, at least nationally, a choice to essentially run a centrist, corporate-friendly campaign. But, and one of the reasons that I have bags under my eyes is because that doesn't seem to me to have worked out well in 2016, and I am terrified that it's not going to work out well again. But I just did, and for those of you who don't know, let me put in a plug here. The Nation has a podcast called See How They Run, which I host, which is horse race coverage from the left. And we just taped Saturday's version today, and it was all about the ground game. Mm-hmm. Now, the ground game is different from what you see on television. And as somebody who's been covering elections for a long time, it's my firm view that it's the ground game that wins elections. And we were talking, it was Jeet here and somebody from Swing Left. And Swing Left are a very efficient organization. So if you want to spend time canvassing, I would say Swing Left are great people to reach out to. They will send you somewhere where you can make a difference and not waste your time. And what seems to be the case is that the Democrats in their ground game are running in local media economic ads aimed at convincing working class voters that there's a reason to vote for the Democratic ticket. They are running in terms of what they're talking about on the doorsteps. The two issues that Swing Left talks about first and that they hear about the most are abortion and the economy. Mm-hmm. Those are both winning issues for the Democrats. So, that I left that podcast taping a little bit more hopeful than when I began. But as we go through the next round of questions, I suppose here's Here's my question for all of you, or each of you, which is, what is it that the rest of us may not be paying attention to that you're particularly paying attention to? Whether it's, I mean, like I'm watching, for example, early voting figures, and those have been pretty encouraging for Democrats so far. I'm watching certain counties in Pennsylvania because I've been reporting from Pennsylvania for the last 12 years, and so I have a sense of where things ought to be, and if they're not there, I'll start to worry even more. You know, we all have our kind of bellwethers or our benchmarks or our go-to markers. So share with us, if you're willing, what are your secret sources, Christina?
The two things that I'm looking at are Black voters under 45
Okay.
who are disappointed and feel like the Obama years didn't deliver what they wanted. Pocketbook issues, everyone goes to the polls for pocketbook issues. Latinos don't go for immigration, Black people don't go for civil rights. Everyone goes to the polls for pocketbook issues. So the second thing I'm looking at is that I argue abortion is a pocketbook issue. Making someone add someone to their family is a pocketbook issue.
Yeah.
Making someone travel out of state to have an abortion is a pocketbook issue. So I'm looking at white women. White women also are the only ones who can make white men, so they understand the power dynamic there. It's true. I mean, we laugh, but like, it is true. This is like what the abortion debate is actually really all about. They're literally the only ones in the country that can make more white men. So limiting their ability to have autonomy over their body is really important for a lot of white men to make sure that that's the case. So I'm looking at white women in states where abortion is on the ballot to see how they're going to behave.
And what have you been seeing?
I don't know. I mean, I need to see exit poll data. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we shall see. I don't know if we're going to have like a reverse Bradley effect. I don't know if we're going to see sort of Republican white women saying that they're going to vote for Trump and then quietly vote for Kamala Harris. I don't know. I am very curious to see in this particular moment where white women will be.
Okay, so this may be a myth, so check it before you quote it. But Yasmin Hedgie, who's the woman from Swing Left, said to me that one of the most searched terms in the country is, can my husband find out how I voted?
That's interesting.
Followed by, can my husband find out if I didn't vote for Trump?
It's one of the reasons why I actually have been saying in my networks to kind of push in-person early voting as opposed to mail-in voting, because your husband can see when you mail in the ballot, but if you go in-person early voting, your husband can't see.
That's fascinating. I couldn't agree more with Christina that abortion rights pocketbook issue, family issue. I mean, it's the so-called kitchen table issue. And it's also, it kind of saddens me. We've covered the care economy at the Nation over the years, iGenPoo, domestic workers. I mean, there is a real politics and a populism and a care there, which is different than manufacturing, but it gets caught in the misogynistic piece that it's not as tough as manufacturing industrial jobs, or it's not the industrial policy that is needed. I think you need both of them, all of them. And then in my own personal craziness, I've been watching the Polish-American vote in Pennsylvania, where they've launched Christine Baranski. I followed that because it is a result of the Ukraine war that there's been money put in, really for the first time in decades, since like 1952, put into a state because there are 800,000 Polish Americans. At the moment, it looks counterproductive because the Polish Americans are like pro-Trump to a large extent for reasons I could go into, but they're not being swayed by this ad policy which shows Stalin in 1950. But I do think this election, and we can talk more about it, but the blob remains, and the fact that we have this binary debate between isolationism versus neoliberal interventionism. There is an alternative, restraint, realism, and it's going to really harm this country if we're engulfed with wars in this country, in this planet. And I think to find a way to resolve Israel-Gaza, Ukraine war, providing security for all involved. But if Kamala comes in engulfed with these wars and semi-mortgaged to a group which we're seeing around her. A lot of neocons. There's a hawkish alliance. I think that's going to be dangerous, and we need to find ways to address that.
So you were talking about secret sources, like things that I have access to that most people don't. So my secret sources are, I have two for this, right? One is that I honestly do look at how often people call me nigger online as an indication of whether or not we're winning, right? Because the more better we're doing, the more the N-word just comes flying at you, right?
You don't get the intersectional. I get N-word and B-word.
Right? See, the more better we're doing, the more there's like, you fat nigger, right? Right? When we're losing, it's just like, oh, you're going to cry yourself to sleep tonight, right? But when I'm winning, it's just because they run out of, they're not very smart, so they run out of like language ability to express their fear and concern. And so only within the last like week or so has my like N-word per capita like really started to take off. So like that makes me feel a little bit better. The other kind of secret source is that the main babysitter for my kids is a Pakistani woman who just graduated from college. We've had her all throughout college. And so she's kind of my like really like go-to source of like, what are the Browns thinking about the whatever? And it's bad. It's bad. Like it's it was bad with Biden, and then the switch happened, and then it was okay for a while, and now it's bad again. And so I use her as like my little bellwether for just she's either voting for Harris or is smart enough to tell me that she's voting for Harris. So like, make sure that I don't kind of, give her, hand her literature every time she walks in the door. But she's telling me that her friends are not, right?
Did she say why?
Yeah, because of Gaza. Like, they're just not. It's mainly New York and New Jersey friends. They're mainly non-voters, not Trump voters, but they're not. And I feel like if he had asked me right around the Democratic National Convention, I felt like her friend group was gettable in a way that it's not now, and that scares the shit out of me.
But one has to say, in defense of her friend group, the ticket hasn't made much of an effort.
But I have.
Right.
Well, if they win, Elie, they'll have to be reminded how much they owe you.
So I can't believe I'm on the stage. I'm a socialist, but I'm on the stage talking about money in politics doesn't matter. American Republican institutions are strong. So here's another one. I think the Harris campaign is actually running a better campaign than people give them credit for on economic issues. Like, I actually don't think it's a rerun of the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign. I would love if it were, because like I still have a load of like pre-formulated views about the world and the Democratic Party and the centrist wing of the Democratic Party from 2016. But I think a lot of lessons were learned, / I think the influence of the Bernie-crat wing of the party and Warren actually shaped significantly Biden's domestic policy, which Harris had a hand in. And I do think, obviously I don't have this will have to come out after the election as there's thorough reviews of all the ads and talking points. But I do think a lot of the ads that I see, from like Philly area ads and other stuff do seem to be very much like, I'm not voting for Trump because I'm not a billionaire like Trump. It is focused on the tax cuts, and it does seem like that's a secondary message that's also being run with the abortion message. I do think that in the last couple of days, at least it seems that in Harris's speeches, she is pivoting towards democracy and Trump as a fascist, or at least the fascist part was just an offhanded. She was asked, what was she going to say? Right. She should say yes. But the democracy angle, and I do think that's her weakest appeal. So this isn't insider information at this point because the report was released, but I'm the treasurer for a organization called the Center for Working Class Politics. I'm not smart enough to participate in any of the polling or whatever, so I just help them with their 990 at the end of the year. But that organization just released a survey today of a little bit over 1,000 voters in Pennsylvania who were given a panel. It was administered by YouGov, and basically to find out what sort of appeals worked. And the more economically populist appeals work better, especially for working class voters, but across demographic lines, than appeals around democracy in the abstract. I think that's to Christina's point about people voting for their pocketbooks. It is really difficult to figure out how to run as a outsider economic populist when you're the incumbent, when you're literally in the White House. And I think Harris's big disadvantage is the fact that Biden has been, for the last several years, unable to communicate to the American people. So he's been unable to say, listen, inflation's going up, and here are some of the causes, including price gouging, but also some of the underlying causes, but here's how we're performing relative to Europe, and we have strong job growth, and here's our plan. He hasn't been able to convey that message to people. He hasn't been able to sell his victories as far as job creation, sell even the manufacturing jobs that have been created, sell the successes of the infrastructure bill. And I think his communicative failures have put Harris in a position where she can't walk away from his record, but she can't also be the angry outsider because in people's minds, well, you've been in power, so what are you angry about?
Right.
So that lends yourself to talking about Trump's character, which is odious, his lack of respect for democracy, which is obvious, and abortion, and it does make the economic message a little bit harder for her to communicate. But I do think there is a way for her to do it. She should be talking more about Elon Musk. He's very much disliked now, and disliked among demographics, that the party needs to win. So I think there is an anti-billionaire, billionaire tax cut, Elon Musk messaging that could be the final statement to the American people instead of just democracy in the abstract.
And she is going to the Ellipse.
Yes, she's going to the
On
Ellipse.
Tuesday. But you can do both. I mean, you could speak to democracy, and I think the money is going to pour into regional, ground game and advertising for the last 10 days.
Well, I mean, it
But the
seems...
Ellipse is certainly...
It seems like she's making her closing argument about democracy.
Yeah.
It isn't to say that she couldn't make one about an economic populist message. I hope she reads your survey. But there's not much, I haven't seen, I mean, maybe we're seeing different
Maybe
ads.
it'll work.
Although, can I just say, and I don't disagree with either of you, but the motherfucker literally just said, I wish I had Hitler's generals. Like, this is not, like, you end up talking about democracy because he is literally out there having fascist parties at MSG. Like, and so, like, I think part of her focus on democracy is actually trying in whatever way she can to get the media to focus on the actual thing that is happening instead of the bullshit that they talk about all the time. And it's maddening, like even this conversation of like, well, Harris's closing argument is that he's a fascist. Actually, that was John Kelly's freaking closing argument, right? Like John Kelly is the one that called him a fascist. She was just the one who was asked the question. And so it's some like, again, I don't disagree, but like, what is the lady supposed to do? She's running against the fascists. At some point, you kind of have to say so, right?
Well, you have to say so, but you also have to, I think you have to face the fact that calling somebody a fascist in America is not disqualifying.
Right, and I mean, here's the thing.
I'm sorry, I wish it was probably more than anybody else on this podium, but I don't think it is.
But Don, I think, and here's where we have to just sort of like have some hard conversations. A lot of white people do not understand the capacity of white people. They don't think that Donald Trump's antics will ever touch them. So this fascism argument where it's like, I'm trying to have you walk and chew gum at the same time. This man is dangerous and he will affect your life. It's like, I'm not an immigrant. Like, I'm fine, I'm middle class. Like, they don't think that some of these policies will ever affect them. Look at so many women with abortion and the Supreme Court justices. It's like, clutch my pearls, this affected me. It's like, black women have been telling you that for decades, right? Now you want to wake up and see it. So if we know for a fact that people go to the polls for economic issues, if we also know for a fact that Donald Trump wants to be a fascist and a dictator, she's trying to do two things in an incredibly short runway. Like July 20th was what, 3 months ago? So she's running as an incumbent / challenger. So to your point, she can't say, well, I didn't do it. I serve at the pleasure of the president. These aren't my policies. But at the same time, you've got everyone saying she's the president, and she hasn't corrected them either. So she's, in many ways, two candidates in one. She has to deal with two very important issues, fascism and also the economy. which she is a part of. And Biden has the Obama problem where he can't articulate his wins, and they name them these weird convoluted things, the American Rediscovery Back to Work Act. So it's like you can't even tell people what your accomplishments are, and so people don't even know that their job was saved because you saved it, Joe, and he won't say it. So they're hiding their line under a bushel, and now we've got less than 2 weeks, and she's got it. And also, she's a black woman doing the cleanup job. So this is the only thing that makes me sort of sleep at night. It's like, how do we get our first black mayors? It's like when things are falling off a cliff. So it's like, if people go to the grocery store and they feel that things are expensive, life is expensive. If I feel like life is expensive, I know working class people feel like life is expensive. So this is the piece that makes me feel better. It's like, this is the time that we usually have a black person come and clean up the economy. This is the time we have a black person come and clean up the country. So that bodes well for a Kamala Harris.
Okay. On that optimistic note, we're going to go to questions from the audience. Let's see. Okay. I see two people right here. And because I'm a little short-sighted, I'm going to call on you two first. If you're in the back and you want to be called, you're going to either have to wave your arms or come down front. And we have Peter here is got the mic. He will bring you the mic. Please keep your questions short so we can get as many as possible. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Lisa, and I'm going on a nation cruise in December.
God bless you.
Okay. I have a question about the polls.
The polls.
I don't really believe them, and I recently read something by Simon Rosenberg that he thinks that the polls are being manufactured by Trump, and he's paying for some of them. I'm just curious what people's reaction to that is.
Okay. For a minute, I thought you were talking about Katrina's Polish voters. Because I certainly believe them. Well, if anybody else wants to feel this, but I will begin by saying, believe the polls, don't believe the polls. I don't think that they're being manufactured. I think they're being weighted. That's how pollsters work. I think it's very easy. Polls are like sausage. You don't want to see them being made. But I think there are more important things to worry about, frankly. Sir.
I'm 65 years old. I grew up in the Hudson County Democratic machine. My dad was a magistrate and for a while housing authority attorney in Union City, position that no longer exists. Parenthetically, if there's an afterlife, my parents are very happy Menendez is going to prison. He used to live around the corner from
The Menendez
him for a while.
brothers?
No, Bob, I think.
That was a joke. I got it.
What I've seen is the Democratic Party never fight. Two things, rarely ever fight. After Kerry was swift-voted, he could have tried some libel suits. We've seen them work more recently against Fox. He doesn't do it. People are apologetic. They bounce over. 2000, the Democratic Party just says, we're just going to show everybody by not challenging the election. They prevent Jesse Jackson from having demonstrations. Question one is, why is this? And two, when Democrats fail, and they do it a lot, it really hurts. When Republicans fail, 4 years later, they're in great shape. Now, part of it may be Robert Paxton said yesterday in an article, Trump has a social base. Hitler and Mussolini never did, which is pretty scary. But I don't know if that's just it, so I'd like your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Should we take one more, maybe?
Yeah, let's take
two at
one
a
more
time?
question, and then we'll,
Yeah.
let's see, there's a woman over on the other side there. Okay.
Hi. I really hope your best case scenarios come true because I also can't sleep at night, so I don't know how I'm going to sleep tonight. But one thing I haven't heard much about is, there's so much discussion about Trump being old and demented and not in good shape, but I have a real fear that if, God forbid, he gets in, that J.D. Vance will really have a lot of power, that he will be the power behind the throne as Trump disintegrates even more and more than he has already. And I haven't heard that as an issue, a campaign issue. Do you want J.D. Vance ordering your life? Because he is not popular the way that Trump is among the base.
I think there was one more questioner very near you.
Sure.
So if there was one more question very near you, let's take that, and we'll get some answers, and then we'll try and get some more questions. Was there anybody else in this part of the room that had their hand up? If not, oh, okay, fine, one more. Good.
Hi, thanks. This is for Elie. Elie, I'm a big fan of yours and your writing and your Twitter account also. You're one of the few journalists I feel that talks often about the need for structural, or the Democratic Party to pay attention to the structural levers of government and how those are wielded or used or not used. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts about how to seemingly convince the populace and also the Democrats in government that if they don't support structural reforms, then they're also not supporting their policy positions, and how we could try to get some more movement in thinking of the government as a lever to wield as opposed to following the rules.
Okay. Those are very clear questions. Do you want to start with the last question just because it was very specifically
Sure, and I can actually, I'm going to link up your question and your question about why the Democrats don't fight, because it's basically the same problem. And the problem is that Democrats don't focus on the institutional structures at play, and they don't fight in the ways that I think you're talking about fighting, because when they don't, they never lose, right? Like, understand, when Republicans seem weak on this issue or that, when Republicans seem like they don't want to deport everybody, when the Republicans seem like they like and respect women, when Republicans seem weak on Republican issues, Republicans lose primaries all the fucking time. When Democrats seem weak on our issues, when Democrats seem weak on the courts or weak on this or don't really have their back in the game to fight this, they don't lose primaries. They continue to win primaries. We continue to say, like, oh, well, nothing we can do about that. We got to elect our regular centrist frickin', Joe Manchin doesn't lose a primary, right? He can beat, like, regardless of whether or not you think Joe Manchin is the only kind of Democrat that could ever win a state like West Virginia, Joe Manchin never lost a primary. And as long as people like Joe Manchin don't lose primaries, as long as people like Dick Durbin don't lose primaries, as long as people like in New York, Kristen Gillibrand, don't lose primaries, then there's no incentive for them to ever do more than they've done, right? There's no incentive for them to ever go to the mattresses, to fight for institutional change, to fight for structural change, to fight for anything, because their entire then focus becomes the general election. If they don't have to worry about the primary process, if they don't have to worry about getting beat on their left, then their entire focus is going to be the general election, and that's always going to be, how do we help Liz Cheney get him? Like, it's always going to be that kind of focus, because we never punish them in the primary process. And then when I say we should punish them in the primary process, people are like, yeah, hell yeah, I'm voting for RFK. And I'm like, I didn't fucking say that at all. What the hell is your problem, right? Because, like, when we get pissed off, then we do dumbass things like vote for third parties or vote for Ralph Nader, right? The primary is where the action is if you want to change your party. The primary is where you pull your party to your sides, and Republicans have understood that implicitly for a generation, and we haven't. And that is a huge reason on both of your questions for why we fail.
I have to say I have nothing to add to that.
Well, Bernie was a case of, I think Bernie moved the Democratic Party.
Right, and that was
ways
the
in
primary fight. And that was the primary fight, right?
But here's a problem. This is truly structural. Only 10% of seats are competitive, I believe, right? So that's a real structural problem. How can you have primaries with, 10, and
well,
they stay forever?
10% of seats are competitive between parties.
Right.
But as we saw in AOC's race, that was always going to be a Democratic seat. But the Justice Democrats waged a primary campaign,
but
and
I
they
want to
won.
say, and WFP has part of its mission was to pull the Democratic Party to the progressive left.
So just in New York, just by the way, I always vote on the Working Families Party's line. Like, I'm a registered Democrat because it's a closed primary process, and
I think we need to have another panel about the WFP, because I struggle with their relevance these days. Some of their shenanigans with Cuomo.
I agree, but when they started in '96, it's been around a while, and it's had some, real successes. I will say, I think that one of the silver linings of Trump is that people now talk about the filibuster. They talk about electoral college. They talk about the structural, the court. Quote, the court reform, we don't help ourselves with packing the court. Right. But you've written, and that, Noam Chomsky used to say he wished people would come to a political radio like they come to sports radio. You people in the green room, I mean, you can see the passion, the intensity. But I think people do come today with more sense of what needs to be done to make this a more fair system.
Well, to Katrina's previous point about money in politics, I think where it really plays a huge role is actually within primary processes. Yeah. And this is how you end up with a ton of Democratic Party candidates. They all go to law school, then decide to join the military for 3 years, and then after 3 years they're out, and then they go and they start working at McKinsey or at a big law firm. They get some money, some connections, which they already had anyway, and then they run for office as like a centrist Democrat who's also a veteran. This is...
they were like cloning them in vats.
Exactly. Whereas I think
He's not joking. My father used to work in local politics, and when I said that, look, I wanted to run for office when I said in law school, he was like, great, go work for McKinsey. Because boy, I'm just telling you, you ain't good at war, so you're gonna have to go work for McKinsey, then go to that big law firm job, and then you can run.
Yeah, Pete Buttigieg, for all my disagreements with him, is probably the best version of a human being who went down this horrendous route from all appearances. It might help that he had a Marxist dad. He might have gotten that from him. But you have these people going against like who? Like, are you going to be able to run a teacher, a postal worker? Are you going to run? People want working class candidates, but the barrier is too high. So I think you don't have that sort of competitiveness. And obviously program matters too, but I think at the level of connecting with people and believing with them and then being able to communicate about pocketbook issues, naturally you're going to find it in these candidates we're not getting. But the last thing, this connects obviously to the question of social base, and that parties in the US don't have a huge roster of candidates precisely because I don't think there's a deep social base to politics in the US because of our party structure, which in the context of your question is probably a good thing. I mean, the Nazis had a very deep social base. Everywhere where there was a trade union that was disproportionately social democratic trade unions, the Nazis would try to set up a parallel trade union. The youth and the unemployed all were organized into little unions, and those were normally communists. And the Nazis set up little parallel youth organizations and organizations of the unemployed. Every party had like a street fighting wing, including the Social Democrats. So this was a level of mass politics and organizing and mobilization that is a far cry from anything in the US. And when it comes to the working class people organizing their own interests, I think that's a bad thing. When it comes to fascist organizing, I think it is obviously a good thing that the Trump base is much more mobilized through a typical right populist sort of articulation, with a soft bond of communication from a leader that's able to get some people to turn out at some places, but very weak bonds. You see this at the Trump rallies. I know this is a liberal talking point, but I think it is true that there's less enthusiasm. You could see at the rallies, you could see the people bored, you could see the turnouts not what they were in 2016. And I think that combined with America's already weak state capacity makes me not worry as much, and I'm qualifying this because it's a lot, I think, safer to worry too much than to worry not enough about something like mass deportation of 20 million people. Well, there's 12 million or so, 11 million undocumented people. I don't think there's a state capacity to do more than, I think Obama's peak was like 450, someone fact check that, 450,000 deportations. Trump's peak was around a 250,000. I don't think it was for a lack of trying. I think it's because of the weakness in state capacity. I don't think he could will a mass base of volunteers to do that work either.
Can I just, I want to address your question about not being able to sleep. Since we talk a lot, we were in the back talking about my Knicks and go Mets, and now go Dodgers. So we were talking a lot about sports. And by the way, the McKinsey folks are the ones who organized how you get in and out of the Yankee Stadium. So that was a waste of money, colossal. But I will say this about the sleeping piece.
It kept them from organizing war crimes.
Right.
For a week, anyway.
Right, for a week. The reason why I think that I'm sleeping okay, I mean, I'm a woman of a certain age, so I'm gonna sleep okay, but is because I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing. And I think people have all this anxiety, and it's like, ask yourself, are you doing everything that you need to be doing so that on November 5th, you can have the result, whatever the result may be, in a sports metaphor, you've left it all on the field.
Thank you.
And so, my grandmother used to say, it's like, if you're gonna pray, don't worry. If you're gonna worry, don't pray. But it's one of those things where I think a lot of people, especially in New York, are like, what am I gonna do? Chicken Little, Chicken Little. It's like, well, there are actually a lot of things you can do. And if you don't wanna go to visit a swing state, there are lots of organizations where you can robocall. You can talk to your relatives, especially the whites, right? Like, you have relatives who are on the fence. You have relatives who are going to, vote against their own interests. So I think that there are lots of things that can happen in these next 2 weeks that can actually help people sleep a little bit better because they're actually contributing to the result that they want, whatever that result may be.
And I want to answer the second part of your question, which is the J.D. Vance question. There's a reason why he's in mothballs. He's there for when Trump dies. He's not there for when Trump still draws breath at whatever diminished capacity Trump draws breath. Because the real power behind the throne at the point where Trump can no longer chew the leather but is still technically alive, you already know him. His name is Jared Kushner, right? Like, that's who's going to be running the country when Trump can't do it anymore, even to the diminished extent that he can. It's Jared. It's always been Jared. It's always going to be Jared. J.D. Vance knows that. J.D. Vance is there for the rest of their party and their movement when Trump actually kicks the bucket. Peter Thiel and the rest of them want him. But Jared's the power behind the throne. He always has been.
But to your question about 2000, how are we here? After 2000 was a coup. And the court, people should have understood more clearly, but the interns at the Nation don't have a sense of that. I mean, remember the Blue Ribbon Commission was set up? Those are doomed to die. But you do go back to that period, and it's like, but you sort of knew it was over when Warren Christopher showed up for the Democrats and James Baker for the Republicans. And people used to say Democrats came to a gunfight with a knife or a pillow. That's improved, but John Kerry...
We're much better lawyered up this time. We really, like Mark Elias, just the Harris campaign in general, we're much better lawyered up for a one, as Katrina was saying, they showed up in Florida in 2000.
And they demobilized Jesse Jackson, who wanted to do the street.
So I'm not saying that we're going to fight it as well as they fight it, but we at least know that could be a fight, and I feel like we have the lawyers in place in the key states to at least defend her interests in those kind of post-election scenarios.
I think, there's one over on this side, and there's another lady on this side, so these two. And I don't know how much more time we have. Okay, so this lady and this gentleman, and while you're taking the question and getting the mic, I do want to make sure that we all circle back to Christina's good point about doing everything you can do. So I want to leave time for that at the end, and I want everybody to think about, what's the thing they want to tell people they can do. Ma'am.
Answering the question you posed at the outset, what I'm most afraid of is there doesn't seem to be consensus anymore about what reality is about. With AI and just the Humpty Dumpty effect that reality is whatever Trump says it is. I was watching Fox today, because I alternate between Fox and CNN, just to see what the other side's doing. And they were saying that Kamala is attacking Trump personally, and he's arguing the issues. What a bizarre, tortured construction of what's being said. This must be especially frustrating to you as journalists, that you try to say what the truth is, and it doesn't matter. It's not understood, it's not being listened to, it's not being accessed. So that's my biggest fear, no matter who wins.
And I'm sorry to put it like this, but is there a question?
Yeah. Oh.
Like, why do I still have a job?
I know. I guess it's a comment, and yes, the implicit question is, as journalists, how do you attack that?
Okay.
How do you address that? I didn't know I had to pose it as a question.
No, I'm sorry. I sometimes need help. Thank you. And the gentleman just
Yeah.
Take
both.
We'll
take
do
both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just a short vignette. I am a psychologist. I teach here at the New School. I set up programs for the fire department after 9/11 trauma programs. So I work a lot with firemen. Every year I go to 9/11. What I found this year, when I asked folks who they were voting for, they said, we want to vote for Trump, but my wife said to me, if you vote for Trump, don't come home. So you may have an opposite effect. But my question is about young men. I work with a think tank called Equimundo in D.C. We did a study on young men in which we found, high levels of pessimism across the country, depression, problems with relationships, and feeling unattended to and not, cared about anymore. And Trump obviously has picked up on this over many years and been successful at winning certain amounts of these segments of this group. What do you think of the Democratic Party's efforts to reach out to young men and men in general? That's my question.
Okay. Let's take those two questions, and then we'll move on to it. Oh, you had one more?
Yeah.
Was there one more? One more. That's fine.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for your insightful, very insightful comments. I taught at the University of Denver for 49 years. I'm a Jew. I spoke at the encampment. I was criticized by the chancellor, not by name, who was my friend, I thought, who I'd worked with on many issues. I think the panel has underestimated, because the Democratic Party and the news media underestimate, the ferocity of the response to the genocide in Gaza. And the fact that right now on campuses people are being suppressed, Jews who are human and say, I object to every genocide, I object to this genocide. Now, I think if Kamala loses Michigan and elsewhere, that's going to be the reason. And it breaks my heart that she will not respond to Michael Moore and other people who have tried and tried and tried and tried to say, for God's sake, you got to do more than this. We're technically arming a genocide. Read Article 3, Section 3 and Section 5 of the Genocide Convention, and you will find that Joe Biden, sadly, is guilty of genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide. I think it's a terrible thing that this has been underestimated.
Okay. Does somebody want to start with that gentleman's, I think, question, which is, are we underestimating the extent of the revulsion against the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, for their, to put it at its mildest, complicity in what Israel is doing in Gaza and in Lebanon?
Well, I think that one, we could condemn Harris's stance and wish that she took a stronger one and prepare to, in a Harris administration, have a really invigorated anti-war movement that questions the U.S. Commitment to Israel. And we're not even asking, I think much of the anti-war movement isn't even asking the U.S. to break with Israel in a more radical way than it broke with Israel under presidents like Ronald Reagan or George Bush Sr. That had the common sense to know that Israeli interests were not the same as U.S. interests, and that if Israel is indeed to some degree a proxy, or at the very least dependent on U.S. Arms and support, then it needed to be brought to heel to not only prevent the suffering of Palestinian civilians and not only prevent the destabilization of the broader Middle East, but even for the sake of the interests of the narrow interests of the American people. So on that we completely agree, but I think we need to also at the same time make the case that even on the narrow grounds of Palestine, I mean narrow as in one issue, not the magnitude of it, the Trump response to what's going on in Palestine has been so extreme that even for voters voting on this issue, they should be able to tell that even Harris's inadequate, inexcusable in many ways stance is positioned far more progressively than what Trump has said. And again, it's a difficult conversation, but I think we owe it to ourselves to not only commit ourselves to building an anti-war movement, but to commit ourselves to telling the truth about what Trump is saying. And then again, even if you were voting on one issue, that would not be a case for Trump. Harris is obviously making this a lot harder for those of us who are anti-war to make that case. But Trump's statements, I think, are explicitly, not implicitly, genocidal, and will lead to much more destruction in the Middle East.
Defeating Trump is imperative, but not sufficient. I mean, I think you're going to need to tackle this mindset that we hear from all sides, but the indispensable nation. America isn't that anymore. It's a great country, but it's going to be more secure if it works with others. And I think that mindset has afflicted Kamala Harris a little, partly because it's Biden's mindset. And to separate from that is going to be very important. And if I would ask you to read The Nation. Don, as editor, has made The Nation a place of extraordinary investment in the discussion about Gaza. And on campuses, we've had students writing about the encampments, but also about professors being hauled in and attacks on speech. And I think that's going to be something we need to watch. There's a neo-McCarthyism afoot in the land. The guy who wrote the biography of Mario Savio, the free speech movement, couldn't speak at NYU the other day. I mean, it was kind of the irony. Free speech suppressed.
So,
sorry.
We also have the question of men.
we have the question of men, and we have the question of reality and journalism. So, do you want to take men or reality?
Yes, I want to answer the man question. Not because I'm not taking Gaza seriously, and not because I think we're underestimating it. Frankly, there's nothing we can fucking do about it. Like the idea that your vote in this election is going to stop the military-industrial complex that is pushing the genocide forward across just a lot of American foreign policy. Yeah. That one vote in this election is going to change that. That ain't just going to happen. That's not on the table. What is on the table in this election is whether or not women are going to have rights to their own bodies. I mean, and so I completely agree with Bhaskar, but that is just where my mind is. The genocide is horrible. I wish it would stop. It's not going to stop now, but I can save women in Texas right the fuck now if I can get Harris elected. So that's my focus on that. In terms of the man question, so I'm raising two young men. I've got a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. And so I think about this a lot because the man world that they are facing is going to be very different than mine or my father's, because you can't rape women anymore. Not that you were ever supposed to, but you really can't now, right? Because you can't take women for granted anymore. Not that you were ever supposed to, but you really can't now. When I read the polls and I read the stories about the young men who are sad, what they're sad about is not being able to dominate women like their fathers did, right? They're sad. I mean, if you're old enough, you remember Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and the woman's walking away and he uses the whip and you can't do that anymore, you rapey fucking bastard. And I'm sorry if that makes you sad. I'm sorry if that means that you don't have the virality of your forefathers' generation. But the thing that we have to do is to explain to young men that there are better ways of being a man. There are better ways of being masculine. There are non-toxic ways of being manly. And that is a social project that is not on one party or the other to do. It is on all of us as a society and all of us, especially as fathers, to do. To teach our young men a better way of being men. Now that project is interrupted because obviously Trump and the Republicans right now are feeding into every diseased, toxic, old way of being. And they're telling young men, you can have it all again if you just vote for me. You can have it all again and go back and take the woman and chain her to the bedpost and it'll be okay. Like that either. And they're filling these men's heads with that. But the reality is that women are never going back. It's never going to be like it was in the 50s or the 40s or whatever, whatever time that they're thinking of. So we have to do the work of teaching our young men to be better. Is the Democratic Party doing that? It's not a thing that you do as a party. It's a thing that you do as people. It's the thing that you do as fathers. It's the thing that you do as a society. And I think we're not doing it well right now, but that's not a political conversation. That is a social growth conversation that needs to continue to happen.
Well, I think it is a political conversation in the sense that I think there's a broader sense of, I wouldn't call it masculinity, but there's a crisis of purpose that a lot of people are feeling, and I think particularly young men are feeling. And I think we need a ground purpose and to answer the question of what it means to be a man, not in systems or positions of domination within the household, but a role in the community, just being engaged in a community. And it's hard to do that when there's no more civic institutions, when everything's hollowed out, when you're not connected with a union hall, you're not connected with a church, you're not connected in all these different ways that people find purpose and value. And I do think some of this, at least, is tied in with economic trends.
Capitalism.
Tied in with capitalism, but in particular tied in with just the destruction of these civic institutions that gave us purpose. So I obviously agree with Elie about the toxic version of masculinity that Trump is appealing to, but I do think there are appeals and particular policies that we could pursue that are about rebuilding a sense of community that's not exactly like the old community, but will give men purpose. And also historically, for what it's worth, after suffrage in Europe at least, what you saw was actually a swing to the right and a swing towards support for, if not parties of the right, though some parties of the right and Catholic conservative parties, parties of Christian democracy, because women who got suffrage were often tied in with networks of, church networks and other things that veered very conservatively. And men disproportionately were voting for parties of the center left and left because they were politicized and mobilized, not through the church mostly, but mobilized through trade unions. And I say this only to contextualize that I think sometimes, not that Elie was, but I think sometimes we think of almost essentialism when it comes to where voting patterns are lying, where I think we should easily imagine and aspire to a world in which men are disproportionately engines of turnout for the Democratic Party or whatever center-left or left-wing party we have in the future, at least aspire to that as a horizon instead of...
I just want to add really quickly, since we're talking about history, let's also not forget that nearly every society ever has at some point had to deal with a large, angry, young male population that had nothing to do. That is if you look throughout history, that is a rhyme of history, and most societies send their asses to war. That's how you deal with them. That's how most societies historically have dealt with these young men. You send them to war, you let them fight each other, it kind of culls the population, and then you reintegrate them back into society. We're trying to not do that.
Right.
We're trying to do that in a different way. So when you're talking about building community and social networks that these men have a place in, that is essential because, again, the kind of Roman community and social network was join the front lines, my good sir, right? So we have to, with intentionality is my point, with intentionality think through how we're going to integrate these young, loveless men into society in a way that's productive as opposed to harmful.
Well, I think we need to zoom out 30,000 feet because I read a lot of bell hooks to help me understand things, right? And so as a social scientist, if bell hooks is correct, that this country is predicated on white supremacy, anti-black racism, patriarchy, and racialized capitalism. That's the moment we're in, that's the moment we've always been in. Those are the four legs of the table in which this country stands. When you have the visual of someone like Kamala Harris, what I think is part of this existential question that we'll talk about as social scientists many years later, we've got two white men that sort of serve Kamala Harris. One is her Jewish husband, right? So he's white, but he's not white, right? So he's not a proxy for white maleness in the same way that Obama had a proxy for whiteness in his mother and the Kansas values. But he serves his wife dutifully, right? And he's like, she's the smartest, she's the greatest, and I support her. And then you have Tim Walz, who is the stand-in for white men. He's, Middle America, and his son cried, and he cries, and they have emotions, and they are representing a type of maleness that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable, men and women. And so I think some of this conversation that we're not having, is about the future of white maleness. And you have these two white men who are both like, this black woman is dope, and I serve her, and I'm willing to serve her, and I'm fine with it. And I'm gonna vote for her, and I'm gonna do what she asked me to do. One is her husband, because I love her, and one is her running mate, because I will serve at the pleasure of the president, if she is the president. And I think that that's a really hard conversation. It does not, sort of miss us that, Mexico just got their first female president, but, a democracy of our size and our stature has never had a female leader, right? Kamala Harris is only the 4th person who's on the top of the ticket, right, ever. So, I mean, Geraldine Ferrara, 84, Sarah Palin, 08, right? Hillary Clinton, 2016, and then Kamala Harris. So it's like realistically 3 out of 4, right? So this idea of white maleness specifically, and I know that this study has blacks and Latinos and Asians, and they have their own ball of wax too, but I'm talking about white men right now. It's a much larger, longer conversation about this feeling of loss. And it's a real scarier Archie Bunker conversation about none of this was supposed to be, right? You had to see Obama and his fancy black friends for 8 years, right? All these people, it's like, where did they come from? It's like, well, they've been here a long time. You just didn't notice it. And so now, it seems like everything's changing. So when I've had my students ask, in a stats class, it's like, write down how many people of color are in your zip code, right? And then we do a longitudinal study. The numbers are always drastically off. Right? It's like, oh, my zip code is 20% black. It's like, it's 4%. But in 10 years, it went from 2% to 4%. So it feels like it's 20%, but it's not. So I think there's a lot of feeling in this country about what the changes are. Structurally, I don't know, that's a different panel. But this we've always been a pendulum country. And so I think some of what you're sort of picking up in your data is this visual that a lot of white men don't really understand. Most of them have never had a female boss or a black female boss or a black female teacher or someone who is in a position of power as a woman of color. And that is very destabilizing for a lot of men.
Can we just do really quick, like how many people have had a woman of color boss, like in their lives, right? And so that is.
Or hey, let's do professor.
Huh? Professor.
Besides my students here.
Right, so that is somewhat radically different than the rest of the country, right? There's a reason why most of your are nation readers, right? Like that is not the experience most people have had.
We are close to out of time, and we have not addressed the nature of reality. I haven't forgotten. So I'm going to field that quickly, and then we're going to talk about what you can do, and then we're going to let you go home and do it. And I'm sorry if we haven't called on every questioner. So I think that it is our commitment to, if not reality, then facts. Reality is a big claim. Facts are small things. It is our commitment to facts that gives my trade its whatever dignity it has. And I think that if people tell you they're giving you reality, check your wallet. On the other hand, if they're giving you facts, you can check the facts. When we print things in the nation online, we encourage our writers. Here's a phrase I type about 10 times a week. Please link to an online source for all statistical or factual claims not presumed to be part of a reader's general knowledge. So if somebody says something in the nation, you should be able, if you're reading it online, to find out where it comes from. If they're reading it in print, it's because it's been fact-checked. I think that that's really important. It costs us a lot of money to do that, so if you haven't already subscribed to Given Money Television, this is my time to ask you to do it. But I think it's really important, and I think it is a thing that makes print media all print media, including the National Review, including the Wall Street Journal, including Rupert Murdoch's papers, a little different from the electronic media because our sources are supposed to be there in front of you. We're supposed to source things, we're supposed to identify our sources, we're supposed to name our sources, and we're supposed to, if we're not naming our sources, flag that fact and explain why. So I think, yes, reality is complicated and it's contested, and it's right that it's contested, actually. I think it's right that reality is contested, but I think facts are a thing that you should be able to get your arms around or your hands around. So I am going to go to Berks County and knock on doors the weekend before the election because I want to be able to sleep on election day thinking I have done everything I can do. What else can people do? We're going to give Christina the last word because she got the first one.
Well, I feel like a lot of what I do well, which isn't a lot, is a result of being kind of a step removed from day-to-day politics and thinking about things like, for example, the long-term trends of the Democratic Party and the loss of working-class voters and changes in the support for unions for the party, or at least unionized workers. So I think the vast majority of what I'm going to be doing before and after the election is looking at crosstabs of polls and obviously supporting the nation's work. But also I have had the conversation with friends and a lot of the people I've been involved with politics since the Iraq War. Since I was a teenager and involved with the Iraq War protests, I'm still in touch with many of those people. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, so I think having the conversation with people of similar values and commitments to me about why, at least many of my friends are in the Philly area, for instance, why they should vote for Harris, which is not something I would have advocated in the past. And in fact, I think the nation denounced me 4 years ago for saying I was going to vote for Jill Stein. And the reason why I voted for Jill Stein, by the way, is she came by my office and she asked for my vote. So I said, I don't see Trump here.
You're such a cheap date.
Yeah, but yeah. So I think, it wasn't necessarily the most. I knew she was going to lose at that point. But yeah, I think that conversation for those of us who are committed to an anti-war movement that's not beholden to the Democratic Party, but willing to make the decision to say we would rather be in opposition to a Harris administration than be in opposition, potentially criminalized opposition, to a Trump administration. I think that's an important case to make.
I ask Bhaskar, I don't think that, especially at this late date, I don't think you can overestimate how important it is for you to talk to your friends and to your family. Mm-hmm. And those are difficult conversations for a lot of you. And yet they're the most important they are the only conversations that have a chance of persuading people at this late date. One of the classic things that I see online a lot, and I complain about this whenever I see it, it's usually a white girl. It's usually a white woman tweet. Please, Mom, tell me Dad isn't voting for Trump. Mom says, oh. And then she says, oh, I wish I hadn't asked. No, damn it. Talk to your dad. He's the one that has to hear it. Tell your dad about the abortion that you got that he doesn't know about. This would be a good time, right? Yeah. Like having those difficult, so obviously in my family, I don't have this problem. Right? In my friend group, I pretty much don't have this problem, although I understand that is in part because my less reliable friends know not to get anywhere the fuck around me within an election conversations, because I will spend all night doing whatever I can, fair or unfair, to try to convince them to vote for my side. And I've been that way with these people since college, so they know that. So now I am taking all that energy that I can't spend on my friends because they're too smart to ask me a question. I'm spending it on my friends' families. So literally, I've got friends who do not know how to talk to their Trumpy brothers and sisters. And they will text their brothers and sisters, and the brothers and sisters will send a text in, and they will send that text to me, and I will tell them, okay, respond like this. Tell them, like, all right, what you got to do now. And I will spend my nights playing video games and texting. How to deal with Brother Bill today, right? Sister Kate said this. Well, we're gonna go with this. How we talk. That's what I do. Because getting Brother Bill to change his vote in Maine 10 days out, it's my highest best use.
Okay.
So my family's signed, sealed, and delivered. I got no problem there. I'm going to spend the next few days phone banking for the Senate and the House. We didn't talk about the Senate and the House. God. Oh my God! Without one of those, it's not going to be
We're
pretty.
so fucked.
I don't think we're fucked. I just think it's not a good sign, Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown in Ohio is in a lot of trouble. But it's interesting, the abortion issue for him is working, and he's working it, as he should. His wife is his better half, Connie Schultz. But the Senate and the House, really important. And my sister's kind of gonna vote for Harris, though she's just spent the last 6 months working with a Lebanese actress on a Palestinian play, one-woman play coming to New York soon, called A Knock on the Roof, about an attack on a family. But she's for Harris, and with all the concerns. And I think Bhaskar put it eloquently, and you did too, and you did too. And so that's what, but I think the House and the Senate, right?
Yeah. Also because people
And New York.
I know, we were talking, it's very important, it screwed up last time. Yep.
New York is the reason why the House was lost.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also,
last
you got a
time.
weak top of the ticket, Kathy Ogle, I'm looking at you. So, correct. What am I gonna do?
give that man an A.
Right. Don't assume that your family has a voting plan. I think a lot of people are like, my family's good. And it's like, no. Make sure you have confirmation of that. What I've been doing, I'm exhausted. As you can tell, I'm dealing with some sinus stuff. Because it's the micro conversations. There's some people that I have a lot of friends who are now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, single issue voters. Gaza is the most important thing to them ever. Can't find it on the map, but it's like, that's the reason why they can't vote for Harris. I think there's something else going on there. But walking them through why it's easier to be in opposition to Harris than it would be to Trump for a whole host of domestic reasons that matter dearly to a lot of people. And I think giving people the language to talk to their friends and family, recognizing that like a black girl with a PhD, for a lot of people, their dads aren't gonna listen to me. So it's like, you are the best opinion leader in your family. And if there's
you can
something,
fight dirty too.
I mean, so I think that there's a lot of heavy lifting. The one thing that I hate, and I hate to use the word hate, the thing that I hate is when someone comes to me and they said, well, I voted for Hillary Clinton, but my whole family voted for Donald Trump. Or, I voted for Joe Biden, but my whole family voted for Donald Trump. As though they're the good one and the whole family is bad and I should like them because they're the Democrat. And it's like, well, then you didn't do your job. Then you sat on your hands. You made it difficult for everyone else because you decided to vote, but not do any of the heavy lifting. And so now we're dealing with the repercussions. So if I hear in this year of our Lord 2024, well, I voted for Harris, but my whole family voted for Trump, it's because you didn't do the work. And so I think the reason why I can sleep at night is because I'm actually doing the work.
Okay, amen to that. Get out there, do the work, and thank you so much for coming.
Nancy Pelosi clap.
Fabulous. It's an honor to sit next to both of you.